Okay, good evening, everybody. It is 6 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Marcus Ford. I'm just here for support, and I just wanted to go over a couple things before we get started with the presentation. Um, so we are in webinar format for Zoom. So our participants will be muted and video will be turned off to reduce any distractions and interruptions. There is interpretation in Spanish available currently, so if you wanted to have interpretation, interpretation below. The Q&A feature is turned on. If you have questions you would like to type out, you can use this feature and we will get to it accordingly. We'll pause for questions periodically. You can signal that you have a question or comment by using the raise hand button, but as we go through the presentations, there may be some natural breakpoints, or we may wait till the end, kind of depends on the presenter. I don't see anybody using the phone in feature right now, so I won't go over that option. And just as an FYI, we are on Zoom and all Zoom videos are subject to recordings. With that, I will turn it over to our presenter.
All right, well, thank you, Marcus. And I'm Stephen Roberts. I'm the Director of Land Use and Transportation for Washington County. I want to introduce a few folks that are here tonight. I want to start with Chair Harrington, our elected board chair, represents the entire county, is with us tonight, and Commissioner Treece, who's the district commissioner for this part of the county, is here with us as well. And Commissioner Treece and the chair suggested that we have the meeting, and so I think Commissioner Treece, you wanted to say a few words here to kick us off.
Yeah, I just wanted to say welcome to everybody who's participating. I want to thank our staff for pulling the information together. And I want to thank the chair for being in attendance as well. So this is an important issue and I appreciate your participation. Back to you, Stephen.
Great. All right. Well, thank you. So I've got a presentation that I'll start sharing here. I want to run through. There are probably around 20 slides or so. We can talk through those. Folks will be watching for raised hands, and we have a Q&A. I think that's probably the best opportunity. So down near the bottom of the screen, there's a little Q&A button. And if you enter questions in there, some of our team members, I think, will be able to potentially answer some of those questions in real time, and or will prompt us so that we can try to answer them for you as we move along through the presentation and or at the end of the presentation. So I just real quickly, I just want to introduce you to some folks from Land Use and Transportation that are on the call with me. Melissa Lyser. Melissa is our communications manager. Many of you may have emailed or been in contact with Melissa at some point along the way. Heather Sturgill is also one of our communications folks who works on a lot of our capital projects. So you may have interacted with Heather. We have Diane Overstreet, part of our communications team. Diane's going to be helping monitor chats and make sure that questions get directed to the right folks. So thank you, Diane. Joe Yonkins is with us. Joe is our capital projects manager for the capital projects division. His team oversees all of the design and construction of our big transportation capital improvement projects. I have Marla Vick. Marla is a principal project manager with our capital projects work group. Hi, Marla. So she's working on this project as well. And then Rocky Brown is the project manager who's actually overseeing this particular project. There's Rocky. Thanks for being here. And I've got Stacy Shetler. Stacy's our county engineer. So his team either oversees or reviews the designs of the capital projects that the county constructs. And again, I want to thank Marcus for being our facilitator and support here tonight. Very much appreciate your help and support. And did I miss anyone? I think I've got everyone on the county team. Okay. All right. Well, with that,
we also have our interpreters, and I just want to say
yes. Oh, that's right. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabio, for being part of that group. That's very important to all of us at the county. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Fabio was covered up by another window, so I couldn't see. So thank you for that. All right. So I will go ahead and get started. If I can share my screen. Okay, are you all seeing a slide image now? Oh, let's see. There we go. Have to push the share button. Okay, are we seeing it now? Great. All right, thank you. Okay, well, so let me just walk through this, and again, you can enter questions in the Q&A, and we'll make sure to get back to those as best we can tonight or follow up later. So tonight, what we wanted to do is just really walk through and provide a little bit of an overview of the Thompson Road Realignment project. I suspect most of you are somewhat familiar with it already, but we just want to make sure that everybody has some good baseline information. We have some additional information that we are looking to share with you all tonight before we go back to our board next week on September 7th is our scheduled date, and we'll be sharing that same information with the full board of commissioners at that point. And the new information really is arborist findings and recommendations. So we actually had an arborist go out and take a look and assess the condition, or actually two different arborists assess the condition of some of the existing trees that are in the current right-of-way out there that's currently called Kenny Terrace, would be the future Thompson Road alignment. And then we have a couple of options for different types of multi-use paths, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. And then again, we'll just have a Q&A period after we go through the presentation. So just to familiarize you with the area, again, I assume most people are fairly familiar, but this is Thompson Road, sort of between 143rd Kaiser and Saltzman Road on the west. And this sort of red outline you'll see on the next couple of slides indicates the approximate project boundary. So it's really from Saltzman west of the current Thompson alignment here, the north-south Thompson Road alignment. Land use, again, it's a predominantly residential area. There are a few specific uses that are in close proximity to this project site. We have the Findlay Elementary School. There is a large vacant parcel currently that's owned by Tualatin Hills Park and Rec District. That'll be a future community park site. And then there is a neighborhood retail and commercial center at the northeast corner of the intersection here of Thompson Road and Saltzman. So we do have some pedestrian generator or pedestrian attractions, if you will, in the area. So this just gives a quick overview, an aerial photo. And so north, you'll see the north arrow is at an angle here to sort of fit the image on the slide. You can see currently Thompson Road, again, curves from an east-west road to a north-south road, and then curves again off screen, and then connects back up with Saltzman Road here near the Findlay Elementary School, which is just off the image. Again, this in the foreground, this is the future THPRD park site. So the existing roadway, Kenny Terrace, has the barricades here at either end. And with this project, essentially we'll be connecting Thompson Road up through this constructed segment here and then connecting back up to Saltzman Road. So the project will essentially look fairly similar to what you see there today in terms of the roadway. It will have 3 lanes, so 1 travel lane in each direction for cars and a center turn lane. There are on-street bike lanes, and those will be modified to be what we call buffered bike lanes. So they'll, instead of a single stripe between the car lane and the bike lane, there will be 2 stripes that are about 2 feet apart. That just creates a little bit of visual and slightly larger physical separation for cars and vehicles there, or bikes and vehicles. There's an off-street multi-use path that's proposed as part of the project, and then there would be additional stormwater drainage and lighting improvements as a part of the project improvements through here. So I wanted to address, I'm sure many of you have watched or heard about a work session that we held with our board back in February of this year. And the purpose for that work session was really for all county capital projects. The board has adopted a policy where it states a preference to provide safer bicycle facilities on county capital projects. So that might mean something that's called a cycle track or a multi-use path. But in most cases, that typically would mean some sort of a cycling option for people to ride outside the roadway, so that they have additional separation from the vehicle traffic for people that are potentially less confident riders or have safety concerns, or again, younger children, perhaps older adults that may just not be comfortable riding a bike on the roadway but would ride otherwise. So at the February 2nd work session, we took to the board a proposal for a multi-use path and compared that with existing conditions. And at that meeting, a majority of our board members supported implementing the multi-use path option. And again, for those reasons that I sort of stated there, provides that safer, more comfortable option for cyclists, again, regardless of your age or your ability. And then again, because we have those pedestrian pedestrian attracting uses that are in the vicinity of the project, it feels that there could be an increased pedestrian demand in the area over time. And so supporting better access to those destinations by people that are walking and biking. So we have a couple of slides on public involvement. So before the February work session, our project team had been coordinating with Beaverton School District because of the proximity to the Findlay Elementary School. We've been coordinating with Tualatin Hills Park and Recreation District. Obviously, they own that property to the east end of the project that's going to be significantly impacted by the road alignment. So we're coordinating closely with them. There was a presentation that was made at Community Participation Organization, or CPO7. This project falls within the CPO7 boundary, but is very close to the CPO1 boundary. And I noticed on the attendees list, we had folks that are active in both of those CPOs participating tonight, so appreciate that. We also held an online open house for the project back in May of 2020. And I do want to make a quick acknowledgement. There was a statement in the open house that said that existing landscaping in Kenny Terrace would remain as is, and that my apologies that was a misleading statement, we think, because we had not been through the process of identifying the particular bicycle project, or the bicycle facility type that would be used on this project, and that obviously can have impacts on the landscaping. So we inadvertently sort of presupposed an outcome, I think, of that process, and it turns out that was misleading information. So just want to acknowledge that. So comments that we received in the open house, we had quite a few concerns about just the increase, obviously, in traffic. Currently, there are few, if any, cars that ever drive on that roadway that runs through the middle of the neighborhood. So there will certainly be quite a bit more traffic, and some concerns about speeding in the area as well. With that additional traffic and some concerns about cut-through traffic, and I think maybe when we look at a map a little bit later, that might make some sense too, but some concerns that people may cut through the adjacent neighborhoods. And then also we heard from folks that they were interested in ensuring that there was safe pedestrian access to the Findlay Elementary School. So after the work session, we did, as I mentioned earlier, retained a couple of arborists. So arborists are obviously folks that evaluate tree condition, provide advice on tree health and maintenance. And so what we wanted to do was to really try to better understand the condition of the trees and what were the trees that exist in the Kenny Terrace right-of-way where the future Thompson Road goes. And those trees were planted by the developer of the adjacent subdivision back in around 2002. And they've been maintained since that time by the Subdivision Homeowners Association. So as I mentioned, we wanted to sort of understand what the trees were that we had there, and we asked arborists to help us evaluate the health and the condition of the trees that are existing there. We are looking to evaluate the project's potential impacts on trees, and then we saw there was a potential opportunity for us to proactively address any potential issues with trees that are in the project zone as well. So the findings from the arborist reports indicated that unfortunately a number of the existing trees are not really well suited for the areas where they were planted. And so some of them are planted too close, some of them are just really too large for the areas that they were planted in. And that has led, as I'm sure some of you will be familiar with, some of the surface roots, particularly from what we would call the street trees, the ones that are planted between the roadway and the sidewalk, have started causing the sidewalk to buckle in multiple locations along the roadway there. And that's a problem that the arborists both agree will get worse over time as those street trees continue to mature. And one of the concerns there was just that the particular species of tree that was selected and planted in the strip between the road and the sidewalk has very aggressive rootstock, and so it just tends to have large surface roots and grows aggressively. And again, that does lead to those issues with the sidewalk. One of the arborist reports also indicated a variety of different concerns about the long-term viability of a number of the trees, or actually the majority of the trees that are located behind that existing sidewalk, so between the homes and the sidewalk. And there are some species that appear to already have some beetle infestation, and that damage is anticipated to get worse over time. There are a number of the trees that are evergreen that are susceptible to a fungal disease that was called Ceridium canker, I believe. So those trees are not terribly problematic today, but some, I believe, were already exhibiting some symptoms of this, and then a number of them are going to be susceptible. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the trees were really just sort of planted too close together, and that's a tendency when you have immature plants. You sort of space them so that they look good in a relatively immature state, but as they mature, they really do start to grow together and crowd each other out. And one of the concerns the arborist noted, particularly with the trees that are susceptible to this fungal disease, is that a lack of air circulation and separation between the trees can really exacerbate the spread of that fungal condition. So the recommendations from the arborists, so both arborists looked at the street trees, again, the trees between the roadway and the sidewalk, and agreed that those trees really should be removed because of the root issues that I mentioned earlier, that would just continue to worsen over time as those trees continue to mature. And if there is a planter strip retained with the ultimate project design, then we would want to specify a smaller species of tree that would be more suitable for that particular environment, that sort of narrow strip between the street and the sidewalk. Relative to the trees that are located behind the existing sidewalk, so between the sidewalk and the adjacent homes, there would be a need to remove some of the beetle and some disease-prone trees, thinning out existing trees. And again, that would be with the intent of trying to help sustain the healthier trees to grow into their full maturity and potentially reduce the spread of any disease in there. And in both arborists did indicate we had shared a couple of potential alternative designs that were discussed with the board at the February work session. A suggestion from a constituent was to develop what we would call a curb-tight multi-use path, so right at the back of the curb without that planter strip and without trees between the path and the roadway. So that option could preserve more of those existing trees, but it does not really help address the viability concerns with a number of those trees that are located behind the sidewalk. So I think we see some opportunities with this project to help address some of those concerns with those trees, both the street trees and some of the trees behind the existing sidewalk, in order to address the sorry, I had a strange pop-up just come up on my screen. In order to address some of those long-term viability concerns there. So we're going to walk through some different designs. The first design we're calling the baseline design, and that's what the board expressed its preference for in the direction that they indicated at the February work session. And so that is a 10-foot wide multi-use path. And so the multi-use path means that it's a pathway that's off the street, that's designed for both bicyclists and walkers to use, pedestrians to use. And with this design, there would be a 4-foot planter strip between the roadway and the sidewalk. So that matches what you would see on the ground today between the roadway and the existing sidewalk. And then we looked at 2 different alternatives of a curb tight path. So again, a pathway that would be off street, but would not have the planter strip and the trees helping to create more of a buffer between the path and the roadway. So we have a few exhibits that I'll just walk through that kind of help to illustrate, we hope, what those different concepts would look like. On the next several slides, the upper image that you'll see is reflecting the existing conditions that are there today. So what you see there is a 4-foot wide planter strip that we talked about. So again, that's that gap between the curb and the sidewalk. There's an existing 5-foot sidewalk in place today. And then there's about 10 feet between the back of the sidewalk and the adjacent, either in this case, there's a hedge and a privacy fence, or in some places there are some stone retaining walls. So you have about 10 feet of landscape area there. And in the current configuration, the way the road's currently striped today, I'll just point out quickly that it does have an on-street 6-foot wide bike lane, and the vehicle travel lanes are currently 12 feet wide and a 14-foot center turn lane. So with all of the alternatives that we're going to look at tonight, the roadway design changes slightly, but it's consistent across all 3 options. And so we would be installing, as I mentioned earlier, these what we call buffered on-street bike lanes. So it has that additional little bit of space and some paint between the on-street bike lane and the roadway. We're reducing the widths of the vehicle travel lanes and center turn lane. And one of the reasons behind that is that can help to mitigate or manage people's speed as they traverse through a narrower lane, can help people to feel more comfortable driving at a slightly slower speed. So this is the design, the bottom image here again is the design that the board expressed its preference for and the direction that we received at the February work session. And I would note that with this design, it would retain the 4-foot planter strip. And as I mentioned earlier, the arborists both recommend removing street trees, but because we would retain a planter strip here, the project would go back and plant a different species of street tree that would be better suited to this environment. So we would be able to retain street trees in the planter strip. And then it's a little bit hard to make out in these drawings, but I have some other drawings that will help illustrate it a little bit better. But there would be room in this 5-foot area behind the 10-foot path to also plant some trees adjacent to the privacy hedges. And the intent of that would be to stagger the trees so that the trees behind the side, or the trees behind the path would be centered in between the street trees. And I've got a couple of plan drawings that I think will help illustrate that. So this is a plan that sort of shows the extent of where we would be installing trees with the project under this design. So really all the way from Saltzman Road through the Kenny Terrace area, and then extending at least on the north side of Thompson Road past the old Thompson Road alignment here. And then I zoomed in on this a little bit because we wanted to show you this idea of having both street trees planted in what we call the planter strip there, and then we would offset and stagger additional trees between the street trees closer to the home. And we think this does a couple of things. One is that it obviously provides a fairly, over time, it provides opportunities for shading from trees on both sides of the pathway. And as those trees mature, they'll start to really form a pretty good continuous screen, if you will, between these adjacent homes and the roadway because of the relatively even spacing of the trees throughout the zone there. So moving on, this is one of the other alternatives that I mentioned. This is what we call curb tight path. So you'll notice it does not have a planter strip with trees there. So the folks using the pathway are going to be more exposed to the adjacent roadway here. Again, existing condition at the top for comparison purposes. And then this would retain about 9.5 feet of existing landscape area. And we have a table that we'll talk a little bit more about some of the differing impacts of those, but this option would allow for retention of more of those existing trees behind the existing sidewalk. Again, it just doesn't really help in terms of addressing some of those longer term concerns with the health and viability of some of those trees back there. And then moving on, the last option is just simply a 9-foot multi-use path, so very similar to what we just saw, just a slightly narrower pathway, and it just leaves an additional foot of landscaping. So again, would help to retain some of the existing trees that are located behind that existing sidewalk, but we again would not be addressing some of those viability concerns. And I've got a couple of photos that we wanted to share with you as well to show just a little bit of context for what some of these things look like that we've been talking about. And this is a fairly new project. These are trees that were just planted this summer. But this is a 10-foot multi-use path and a 4-foot wide planter strip. So that's pretty consistent with what we're talking about here on Thompson Road with the what we call the baseline design, that first option that we looked at. One thing that's different here, there's obviously a large landscape buffer here, and this design does not have additional trees located behind the sidewalk. And that would be part of the proposal on Thompson Road here would be to have trees on both sides of the path. This is a different configuration. So this is an 8-foot wide path with a 6-foot wide planter. So again, not exactly what we're talking about here, but this slide we thought was helpful just to try to illustrate the effect of those trees that we talked about planted on both sides of the path. And again, if you look closely, these trees are staggered so that the trees behind the sidewalk are placed in the gaps between the trees that are planted near the street here. So over time, as these trees mature, they start to create a nice uniform canopy that really helps provide a lot of shade over the pathway. These are trees that were planted about 10 years ago. So this is sort of what the effect looks like in about that same period of time. And then this is an example, and again, not exactly what we're talking about here, but it shows an 8-foot wide, what we would call curb type path. So the path is located directly up against the curb here. So again, doesn't have the planter strip that helps provide that additional buffering between the adjacent roadway and the users on the pathway. So quickly, this is a comparison table. Again, across the top, you'll see the different alternative designs that we just looked at. And then we've sort of tried to create some comparison against of all three of these options against how the project would affect various parts or various aspects of the environment there. So as I mentioned earlier, what we call the baseline design that would have the planter strip retains that planter strip. It really does help provide that physical and visual separation between the users on the pathway and the roadway. With the other two options, there would not be a planter strip there, so the path would again be up against the street, the roadway. So really in all three of the options, because of the recommendations from the arborist, we would be removing all of the existing street trees. Again, with the baseline design, because we would retain a planter strip, then we would go back and replant a similar number of trees, probably a different species, again, that might be better suited to that environment for the long term without the root impacts that we're seeing now. And again, with the other two options, there would be no planter strips, so the street trees would be removed and would not be replaced. So for the trees that are located behind that existing sidewalk, so with what we're calling again the baseline design, it would require removing most of those trees. But again, as we've noted here, quite a few of those have long-term viability concerns as well. So again, we think that there may be an opportunity with the project to go ahead and help address those long-term viability concerns and plant trees on both sides of a pathway that are going to be better suited to that environment for the long term. With the two curb tight path options, so you can see they require the removal of significantly fewer of those existing trees, but again, it would not address some of those concerns with those trees in that area behind the sidewalk. And paved area, so impervious area in terms of the runoff of surface water, stormwater that falls when we have rain events. Widening the sidewalk, of course, increases the amount of paved area or impervious area. So obviously with going from a 5-foot sidewalk to a 10-foot pathway, we would be just about doubling the amount of paved surface, but the stormwater system in the area is perfectly adequate to accommodate that additional stormwater runoff. And then again, with the two curb type pathway options, the amount of paved area would also be quite similar. So across all three of these designs, the paved surface area of the actual sidewalk will be quite, or the path, I should say, will be quite similar. So that is the end of the presentation. And again, I suspect I haven't been watching, so we may have comments and questions in the Q&A. And if you want to raise your hand, then I think, is this Marcus? You'll be our facilitator.
Yes, thank you. We do have some questions, and just a reminder to folks that you can use the raise hand feature if you wanted to ask your question verbally, and then we can give you the allowances to unmute yourself so you can ask your question that way. The first question that we have for you comes from Fran. Fran asks, have the arborists given recommendation for the actual number of actual trees to be removed?
Not a specific number, no. And so I think that's where, let me back up here. So I'm just going to keep my slide deck up because I assume we'll probably be toggling back and forth as we're talking through some of these questions this evening. So let me find that slide. There we are. So as I mentioned, I think what I would say the arborist report identified out of the about 93 trees that are currently located in the areas between the sidewalk and the adjacent homes, about 13 of those were felt to be really good long-term viable trees. Most of the others all had some sort of either current issue or susceptibility to the fungal disease, and or they're just planted too close together. So there's not a specific number recommendation that was made, but I think it just did indicate that variety of different concerns.
Thank you. Another question asked by Eric. This is a road alignment project. Why so much emphasis on sidewalk and trees when nearly 100% of the residents in the area oppose? What is budget without the additional wider sidewalk? I believe it was 500,000 less. Interesting, that was not shown.
Yes, so let me, so that's a good question. And well, maybe I'll use these photos to try to help create that illustration. And I probably should have prefaced it with a little bit more background too. So the Board of Commissioners adopted a policy in 2017 in which they stated that they have a preference for providing safer pedestrian facilities. I may have just mentioned that very quickly at the beginning, but that's actually sort of the board's adopted policy. And so those safer types of facilities often may include something like a multi-use path, like what we see in this slide or in this slide. And there are some other options, things that are called cycle tracks that are sort of like this, but they're actually more adjacent to the roadway for a cyclist to ride on, but they're elevated up slightly above the roadway too. And so even though we're really the project, the crux of the project from a vehicular standpoint is really just connecting up either end of that existing roadway, we are also trying to start thinking about how we create a more interconnected pedestrian system and bicycle system that's more accessible and more safe and more user-friendly for people of all sorts of ages and abilities. And again, I think in this particular context, there are the pedestrian destinations of the school, the neighborhood commercial center, and a future park there. And so we think that with this road project, there is an opportunity here to go ahead and lay a foundation for what could be a more broad interconnected network of these kinds of facilities. But perhaps even if it weren't part of a future interconnected system, we could still anticipate that there's going to be an increase in pedestrian traffic in this area as the park site develops. And I've walked this area on Kenny Terrace a few times myself just to get familiar with the area, and observed quite a few people out walking at different times. And I actually walked further west on Thompson Road on some new sidewalks that the county built within the last few years that are 5 and 6 feet wide. And I was walking with another person, and we kept having to step aside and walk single file because we kept getting passed by people walking in the other direction or people jogging. And this was at 10 in the morning on a weekday. And so, there is a real, if you build it, they will come scenario that happens. We find this all over the county when we either build a sidewalk where there wasn't a sidewalk previously, or when we upgrade our sidewalk facilities, they do just attract more usage. And then the second part of the question was about cost. And so, yes, so the project design, if we weren't implementing a multi-use path, would be estimated around $6 million. And so you can see the 3 different options here all add either a little bit more or a little bit less than about $500,000 to the overall project cost.
Right, and as you were answering, Eric's hand came up, and so I'm assuming it's in reference to what you were just talking about. So I'm going to go ahead and allow Eric to speak. Eric, you can unmute yourself and ask a follow-up.
Yes, thank you. Hi. While I'm a resident of the neighborhood, Tallamore Terrace, I'm not on the HOA board, but been involved in a lot of the meetings. Thank you all for doing the project. I think the ideas are pretty good. We had a chance, not by choice, someone kind of forwarded to us about the February meeting, and a lot of us listened to it. And since then, petitions have gone around, and nearly 100% of the people that actually live here do not want this to happen in terms of the sidewalk part of the project. And I'm just interested in to know if this was such an important thing that Chairman Harrington brought up 3/4 of the way through the February meeting on a 3-2 vote. Why did you not then, if you had a policy to do this, put a 10-foot sidewalk in from 143rd to Bronson Creek that was just installed? And also on the, I'll get my directions wrong, on the south side of Kenny Terrace, that 10-foot sidewalk will come to a dead end. There's nothing there on the Hartung Farms estates. They're not going to ever want a sidewalk on that side. So you're stuck there with just a sidewalk to nowhere, spending $500,000 on something that on an arterial artery you think people using the streets now, they won't come because the traffic will get more. And that's the last place I would want to take my 4-year-old to learn how to ride a bike. So it just doesn't make sense in terms of the actual versus the nice pictures, because in reality, you're going to have a busy road, potentially no trees buffering or no little strip buffering the road from the sidewalk. You got, going up to the whatever in 3, 4, 5, 10 years, Twalton Hills is going to put a park in. By the time those trees grow up, we're going to be dead or retired and even move out of the neighborhood. So it just seems to me like it sounds good. It may end up good. Who knows? Who can predict the future? But for the cost and everything else, why not leave it as is? Maybe take out every other tree that's on the strip to have more space and more air, and have the trees next to the neighbors grow better. But anyway, that's just my 2 cents. But thank you for answering all the questions. I just thought that many of us, there was a petition by a little child that did a run around the neighborhood and got, I don't know how many hundred, double-digit number of people that responded, and people are upset. There was no chance to, other than today, to have a voice. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your comments, Eric, and I think maybe just a couple of things. You're right. The current project is not going to extend the sidewalk on the south side further west. So yeah, you're right. That's going to be a sidewalk that's going to end at that location. And I think that we view a lot of our projects that we design as they're all installments on the future system, the transportation system. And so as you've driven around the county, no doubt you see that we have roadways that have been improved and are quite nice, and then you transition into a section of the same roadway that's just 2 lanes with ditches on either side, and maybe there's a sidewalk and maybe there isn't. And so we have been going back and trying to do a variety of different approaches to just try to help alleviate some of those, or not alleviate, but to address a lot of those deficiencies in the system. So the roadway projects tend to be bigger and more expensive, and so some of those sidewalk projects that I mentioned, for instance, further west on the north side of Thompson, those were constructed at a narrower width because we actually have a fairly constrained right-of-way. So without actually going out and buying property from adjacent property owners, we just don't have the space in which to build a wider sidewalk oftentimes. And in those locations, we're working to try to just build in a basic level of pedestrian connectivity in places where there just isn't that ability. And what we found again throughout the county is, and this is what I observed when I was down walking on Thompson, and it's happened in my own neighborhood where a sidewalk was built on a fairly busy road like this. No one ever used to walk there, and now when we go out for our walks, we pass a whole lot of people, see our neighbors out there, and so there is a real, if you build it, they will come. And I think if you build it better, more people tend to come, has been our experience. So it doesn't address, I know that doesn't really help address all of your questions, but I just wanted to share, I think, a little bit of that thinking that goes into how we approach building out the transportation system. And it is incremental and it happens over time.
All right, thank you. Just wanted to let folks know there are a lot of questions, so we're going to work our best to try to get them all answered. Next question is from Susan. Susan asked, have you considered some sort of swale option in the planting strip to control runoff?
I might look to the project team. I don't know if Joe or somebody would like to address that. My understanding is that we have not right now. The roadway as it exists today actually has a fairly standard stormwater runoff system. And that runoff system, or stormwater runoff system, was designed so that it will easily accommodate all the water that's coming off of this. And then there are different opportunities for how we would actually treat the stormwater. There's Joe.
There we go. Sorry about that. Only takes me 3 minutes to figure out which buttons to push. Yeah, so the existing storm system is in place, which we would be reusing. All of the water does go down to the southwest end of Kenny Terrace where we're collecting it. We have a water quality facility that we're going to expand, and that facility can treat all of the water runoff from the road and the sidewalks and things like that, along with meeting the current Clean Water Services requirements for hydro modification or the storage of water before it gets released down into the creek. So we have an existing system that meets that requirement and does a pretty effective job without having to spend more with some lighter facilities that would be right along the roadside, which would probably at some level hinder getting some of the street trees back in also. We would have to put in some pretty small lighter facilities, but we at this time are sticking with the existing system.
Thank you, Joe.
All right, thank you. Next question that was put up for Q was by Derek. Why would a wide sidewalk make sense when it goes to nowhere? Oh, it disappeared. Hold on. Why would a wide sidewalk make sense when it goes to nowhere on the southwest side in front of the Harrington farms? Also, if 10-foot is desired and part of the new policy, why wasn't it put on this new sidewalk with cement hardly cured on Thompson from Bronson to 143rd?
Yeah, so I think those were pretty similar to Eric's questions. So I'm hoping maybe we've addressed that. But Derek, feel free to let me know or let us know if you have any follow-up on that.
All right, thank you for that, Stephen. I'm going to go to a raised hand. We have Fran's hand raised. So Fran, you can go ahead and ask your question. Unmute yourself first, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for spending the time here. I think one of the things that you could learn about this too is that this Kenny Terrace trees is actually in CPO1, not in CPO7 area. And the presentation made to CPO7, so that's the nearby neighborhood, but it's not the immediate neighborhood that's affected. And so the people that you talked about, the right of way up in the northern area is a shorter area. So they don't have the opportunity for the wider multi-use path. But I'm hoping that in the future, any discussions will be with CPO1 community, this community that's most immediately affected. The other thing is, I think this demonstrates how much the Washington County residents are concerned about the existing trees. And I'm hoping that you will at least identify a tree board or tree stewardship when you look at what you're going to do with these trees. I mean, if the decision will be made up by the board that they're going to remove trees and or replant new trees, then it would be good to consult with the people who are going to have to live with those trees. Because I believe that the homeowners association will be responsible for maintaining those trees. Then it would be important to get them involved in the selection and for them to know upfront, because it's a lot easier to manage expectations if you've set them up front. So that's why I asked the question about how many trees, which you've done a good job of identifying here, but which trees and why. And as one of the arborists said, you know, yes, every tree has some level of maintenance required. Not all of them are going to live forever. Some of those superficial things are not necessarily deadly. Those are just superficial observations. So it would be good to have someone from the neighborhood involved. So in this case, I'm looking at that you're talking about removing some of the trees, may not necessarily be 86 of those 93. But this looks like a little bit more of a compromise situation. And the other one is that I would like to see that you have some minimum potential size that you start with, so that you're not planting little tiny saplings, but they have a really good size tree to begin with. That's my contribution here, because we know the existing trees do a great deal for CO2, for lowering the temperature of the neighborhoods. and a lot of other contributions to climate mitigation that a sapling could never do for 20 years. So again, thank you very much for everybody's involvement. I think earlier involvement with the CPO1 and the immediate neighborhood would have helped a lot.
Yeah, and yes, and thank you, Fran, for catching my mistake about the CPO. Thank you.
It's okay.
Appreciate that. Yes, and I think your points are all well taken, and I think as we move forward, we certainly are going to continue engaging with the neighborhood and the homeowners association. One of our next steps with the project, I think maybe Rocky can help us out. I know we are talking about doing another open house for the project, and I am drawing a blank right now on the timing of that.
Hey, Stephen. So we're waiting to see what the results are from this meeting, and we're looking at possibly November for the second open house.
All right, great. Thank you, Rocky.
All right. We have another question in the Q&A from Kayati Shah, and my apologies if I mispronounced that. Is county considering providing retaining wall to impacted houses like Bethany Boulevard houses have?
Oh, okay. I suspect that might have been a sound wall, probably. I think I will probably ask Joe, do you mind?
Yep, no problem, Stephen. At this time, there's no, we did not do a sound wall analysis, and based on when the homes were built relative to what the road was determined to be, that we wouldn't look at noise mitigation on this section of road. That we're really not expanding the road any more than what it is. We're not adding a lane. We're just making that final connection from prior what it was before. We haven't changed what the road is itself, whether collector to arterial or adding it from a 3-lane to a 5-lane. So we wouldn't look at sound mitigation.
Forgot to leave that last slide up.
Was that it for that question? I apologize, Stephen.
Yes, I think so. Yeah. So yeah. To sum up what Joe was saying, the county policy for a project like this does not require doing noise analysis or providing a noise wall. We're working within that existing right of way. The developer at the time had the opportunity and capability and encouragement to construct some noise separation. So what was built in this location were a combination of fences and an evergreen hedge that helps provide the visual supplement the visual buffering between the homes and the roadway.
Thank you. Another question from the Q&A from Jim. Jim asks, I see the curb tight path is analyzed in both 10-foot and 9-foot widths. Can the baseline scenario be modified to 9-foot path in order to reduce the paved area?
I think that's something that could be evaluated, but I think the preference for 10 feet is that if we're trying to create a true multi-use path where we want to have the ability for people to cycle and to walk comfortably, potentially side by side, then we're looking to try to create a 5-foot bike lane is sort of considered our minimum bike lane width, and a 5-foot sidewalk is considered our minimum sidewalk width. So put those two together and you've got a 10-foot wide pathway. So 10 is typically what we would want to strive for in a situation like this. That would be considered the ideal scenario.
Okay, looks like we have another question. So Eric noted, I think in regards to the last question that you were answering, Eric says the last answer was not accurate. The road, of course, isn't changing, but the amount of road traffic goes up 100%.
Mhm. Yes, yeah, but the roadway, I guess maybe a better way to phrase that might be that the roadway was designed and constructed for its ultimate purpose. So the purpose for which we're connecting it up now. At the time the subdivision developed, the developer didn't control the right of way to be able to make those connections, and so that's why the roadway has been closed off all this time. But it was always designed and constructed in order to function as the major roadway through that area. So the experienced amount of traffic is obviously virtually zero right now. The intended amount of traffic that it was designed for, it should be consistent with what will happen when the roadway is realigned and opened.
All right, we have a hand raised from Christine. Christine, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. Oh, it looks like Christine left the building, so I will move on to the next one. Virginia has a hand raised. Virginia, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you. One thing I think some folks are forgetting, that it won't be too long before the Park District begins to develop that large property to the east. And the sidewalk will be helpful for the residents of Hartung area and other areas to the west to get to the park, both on the sidewalk and on their bikes. I'm not sure what the school boundaries are and whether the Hartung folks go to Findlay School, but the sidewalk is going to serve people beyond what's happening now.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a statement, not a question.
Thank you, Virginia. And I was just thinking, based on what you just said, again, Virginia prompted a reminder for me too. I think the questions that Eric and Derek had posed earlier a little bit about that sidewalk on the south side ending before it gets to Hartung Farms. And so there will be a point at some point in the future when Thompson Road does get improved, likely through a county capital improvement project like what we're doing right now, that would extend that sidewalk across the Hartung Farms frontage. So that isn't a planned capital improvement at this time. And as I noted, we did just build those new sidewalks on the north side of Thompson Road to just help ensure that there is an off-street pedestrian walkway on at least one side of Thompson Road there, so that people can traverse that area on foot more safely. And but yeah, there will come a time when Hartung Farms will get the street improvements and sidewalks constructed out in the front there.
All right, we have another hand raise. Virginia, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm not seeing Mary's comment being addressed at all, which is, it seems to me like that center turn lane is pretty useless throughout much of the length of the road, and it could be replaced with a planter strip with low shrubs and ground cover, which would make it more pleasant. I'm not sure whether a planter strip is cheaper to build than roadway, but it would also address some of the drainage issues. I think Clean Water Services prefers to have what we call rain, what you guys call stormwater, prefers to have it filtered through plants and earth before it gets to the drainage. I think that's a very nice idea, and I'd really like to see it considered.
Yeah, so I think that's a good takeaway for the team. We'll take a look at whether there are options for a planter or planters in the middle of the roadway. so yeah, I appreciate that suggestion. And I think in terms of, I'm not the engineer here, but my understanding is the roadway, probably the middle of the roadway is the highest point. And so the water is typically flowing away from the middle of the road into the outside edges of the roadway. And so I think being able to capture the stormwater in the middle of the roadway might be a real technical challenge. But it's something that we'll take as a note and we'll take a look at. So thank you.
All right, we have a question typed out from Yati again. All three designs have 9 or 10 feet sidewalk options when your new community is not happy with the decision. Is this already decided, or there is still an opportunity to save money and do improvements where there are really needed on Saltzman Road, like sidewalk around school on Saltzman Road, street lights, and better rain drainage?
Yeah, the board definitely expressed strong support for implementing a multi-use path option in February, and so that's why we've really taken a look at these path options. And so, I think that decision has been made. And so what we're looking for now is really just trying to solicit some feedback from the community about the options that we presented here tonight. And again, in light of the additional information that we have from those arborist reports that we did not have back in February when we first presented our multi-use path option to the board. And I think there was a question about sidewalk on Saltzman near the school too. And I think that as a part of this project, we are taking a look at how this project connects up to Saltzman Road, and taking a look to see if there are some opportunities right in that area for us to try to help pick up any small improvements that might be helpful in that area. Again, just looking at an eye toward how do we help improve the pedestrian connectivity in that area.
Thank you, Stephen. We have a hand raised from Jim. Jim, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi. So, I will say I don't know that I see the need for this part of the project. The neighborhoods to the west, the Bronson Creek Estates, they ride buses to Findlay, the Hartung Farms, they map into Terra Linda. I don't see that they're also half a mile away from the park. I don't see that people are going to be using the multi-use paths to get to the park or get to the school under these circumstances. But it sounds like there's a decision that there must be a multi-use path. And if there is that decision, I'm in favor of the baseline design path, partly because I like the idea of the 2 offset rows of trees on either sides of the path, and partly the evergreens behind my home are dying as it is, and they need to be replaced as it stands. So if they get replaced as part of the project, great.
Thank you, Jim.
All right, we have a question from Eric. Eric says the 10-foot sidewalk, while a good idea, if it connected to other 10-foot multi-use sidewalks, the main reasoning is faulted as it will end on Northwest Saltzman and at the end of the current Kenny Terrace, plus safety concerns of riding bikes / walking on a main artery. Planning Commission recommended no changes to sidewalk and trees, but board changed this in February with only 1 or 2 of the 5 members having visited the neighborhood. No timing yet on THPRD Park. I hope it all turns out nice and does not lower property value. Thank you.
Yeah, and I know as a part of our project scope, and either Joe or Rocky, you can jump in to correct me if I misspeak, but I know that as a part of our project, we are also looking at extending the wider path along the Saltzman Road frontage of the future park site as well, with the expectation that, again, as the park develops, the wider pathway will be useful both on the Thompson Road frontage and on the Saltzman Road frontage of the park site. And again, I guess I would go back to, while this might initially be a sort of isolated and possibly slightly disconnected section of wider sidewalk, I think it does provide the groundwork for future similar improvements that could be implemented in different projects in the future too. So in some ways, I guess I would look at this almost like a down payment on again, as we talked about it, just a down payment on a better system for folks that are outside of a car, on foot or skateboard or a wheelchair or walking and biking.
Okay, next question from Mary Lou. Why were these options not discussed beginning in February? I listened to that meeting and there was a 6-foot option for the sidewalk.
So I think the 6-foot sidewalk would have been, again, when we talked to the board back in February, again, consistent with the board policy of presenting both suddenly struggling with the word, separated bike facility and an on-street bike facility. We just showed them two different options, one of which was where we had the existing sidewalks in Kenny Terrace, those would remain as is, and then where we were building new sidewalks along the park frontage, those would increase to a 6-foot width, which is more consistent with what the county's current minimum sidewalk width expectations are when we're building sidewalks on a major roadway. And maybe that raises a good point. I maybe didn't say this earlier on too, but I think that the county's standards have evolved over time, and I think that we're in the middle of another one of those sort of evolutionary phases. So over time, the county used to not build sidewalks in most neighborhoods, and then probably in the 80s, we started requiring developers to build sidewalks in the neighborhoods, and so we have an awful lot of neighborhoods that don't have sidewalks at all, and those are places where at some point we are hopeful that we'll be able to retrofit sidewalks over time. And in some neighborhoods, they do have a sidewalk, and then the sidewalk standard for the county increased from a 5-foot sidewalk on a major roadway to a 6-foot sidewalk. And so over time, our policies and standards do evolve. And again, I think we're seeing more emphasis now than ever on trying to help accommodate safe and comfortable travel for people that are not in a car, right? So really creating a better bicycle and pedestrian environment that will help people to move around their neighborhoods and to nearer destinations within a few miles perhaps of their home without the need to jump in a car to do that.
And waiting for other questions to get flagged. And just a reminder to folks, you can use the raise hand feature if you wanted to ask your question audibly. Kayati, again, sorry for butchering your name, asks for option 1, how many years old trees did you envision on planting?
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know that we've gotten into that level of detail yet. I think that's a good question. So I think this also touches on a question that I believe it was Fran asked earlier, or a suggestion about thinking about planting rather than very small sapling type trees. Can we look for trees that might be a little bit larger than what you might plant at a project site, where oftentimes you're talking about trees that are maybe this big around? Can we plant something that's a bit more mature? So I think that's a good takeaway for us to try to work with our landscape consultant team to try to evaluate what our options may be there. And I think one of the challenges that with larger trees, number one, they're just difficult to transplant, and the survival rate can sometimes be problematic for a larger tree. So in some ways, it is better for a tree to plant something that's relatively small, but will be allowed to grow in its natural environment without needing to be transplanted.
Yeah, Stephen, can I just jump in just for a second?
Definitely.
I think that kind of to answer Fran's question a little bit, I think that we'll work with our landscape architects and look at, we need to look at what the diameter of that that trunk needs to be, whatever DBH, the diameter breast height. And also a factor that comes into that is the size of the root ball of the tree when we purchase, because we're trying to fit it in, say, between the back of the curb and adjacent to the multi-use path, which at 4 feet, we need to make sure that the root ball isn't too big to fit into an area that we've excavated for that when we put in a root barrier. So there are a couple things that we need to look at. Maybe something on this might be a 3-inch DBH, making sure though that the branches are 6, 7, 8 feet off of the ground. There's things that go into it. And the other thing that also comes into it right now is the reality is stock. A lot of times just being able to find a series of trees of a similar height of different varieties, because we don't want to plant maybe just one variety in case there is ever sort of a disease that comes through. It doesn't wipe out all the trees. So we would look for a mixture of them. So it's finding enough trees that we feel meets the size that we're looking for. And sometimes it takes a little while to do that because we are planting them on, it looks like we would be both on the north and the south side of the multi-use path, on both the north and the south sides of the road itself. So it's a fair number of trees that we're looking for. But we will be working, like we said, with our landscape architects on that.
All right, thank you, Joe and Stephen. Another question from Susan, and Susan asks, what is the expected mature size of the trees on the approved list for the planter strips?
That is another good question that I really am not going to be very helpful with. So I don't know if Joe or Marla or Rocky want to address that. And I know that there are a whole lot of different tree varieties that do come in a whole variety of shapes and sizes. And so one of the things that we'll be looking at here will be, again, trying to find something that would be ideally suited to this particular kind of growing environment. And I suspect the answer might be that those could come in a wide variety of shapes and sizes. And so some trees are very sort of tall and narrow. Some trees tend to be a little wider and maybe not as tall. So I think there would be a variety of different options there. And again, I think back to our sense earlier that we would certainly want to work with representatives from the homeowners association to help participate in selecting what kind of trees would be installed here.
Yeah, Stephen, that's a really good answer. I think that the height will really vary based on the variety and what we're trying to accomplish. In this case, there are no overhead power lines. So that sort of eliminates some of the issues that we have here. I think maybe the other thing is street lighting, and we'll need to adjust the trees to accommodate the street lighting that'll be installed. But it will be the arborists and the landscape architect, I think, will have some good ideas of the types of trees that we'll want to have out there, and a kind of mix, whether if it's just kind of the street trees or other trees that can get mixed in behind with some evergreens and pines. I think we talked about, it was one of the Colorado varieties that the arborists really liked and were very healthy out there. Maybe need a little bit of pruning. So look at something along those lines that have been very healthy and have done a good job of growing out there.
Right. Next question is from Cody, and Cody asks, what is the timing that you will be starting construction on this portion?
I'll again probably look to Joe or to Rocky to take that question for me. You might just leave your camera on, Joe.
I think I could do that, Stephen. I can manage that. Yeah, our goal, assuming we can move forward, and obviously we have another open house coming up here in 2 months. I think Rocky had set out, looking out roughly 2 months. We really would like to try to be out there for next summer. Our goal for being out there during the summer is when school is out, and especially being able to build that piece up at the north end and the work that we need to do around the school and making sure that we have access to the school while the work is going on. At some point though, we need to work on the rest of the road and would probably be the summer of 22 that we would be out there well into the fall of 22. And maybe even into the winter to finish everything up, especially with the landscaping. We'll want to be planting in the fall, basically the dormant season into the winter, if we need to, and may even extend out into 23. But spring of 22 would be ideal. That way we can get materials ordered and things like that and be ready to go really at the end of school. So we're up near the school, we can get that started and that work done first. But it would take us all of, for sure, 2022 to complete the project.
Okay, thank you. And then we have a question from Yati to the board. And they ask, are we still not thinking about reconsidering our decision from February's meeting?
This is Pam Treece. I'm Commissioner for District 2, and I can tell you that we are meeting next Tuesday in work session to hear the new information from the arborists regarding this project. And we appreciate all of the input from the public. Our issues are public safety, adhering to the concept of having multiple-use pathways so people can traverse safely. So if you're asking if we are going to reconsider the multi-use path, it really is an issue of what is the information that's coming to us from the arborists and how are we looking at that in relationship to making sure that we can keep the thoroughfare safe and yet protect the environment with the trees as well. Stephen, do you have anything to add to that?
I do not. Thank you.
And I concur with what Commissioner Treece responded with. Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you. The next question comes from Mary Lou. Mary Lou asks, a wide sidewalk does nothing to mitigate climate change. Mature trees make a huge difference. It makes me sick to think all those maples are to be removed. Who would want to walk along that path in the summer heat with no shade? Those maples were chosen 20 years ago to do just what they are doing today. Why remove them now? Trees always cost money to maintain. They are worth it.
Yeah, I don't know that I can really answer that. I would say I tend to agree. I mean, the notion of going in and removing a lot of existing trees, those street trees, is a, it's a challenge, granted. And so again, I think this is really an opportunity just to try to help address some of those concerns that we noted, right? The trees are already damaging the infrastructure. That's going to continue and worsen over time. So I think we have an opportunity with this project to try to help address that. And that reminds me, Joe mentioned earlier too, as we planted new street trees, we would be installing what's called a root barrier. And that's a kind of a shield, if you will, or a physical barrier that tries to help minimize or prevent tree roots from growing up underneath a sidewalk where they can continue to cause some of those challenges that we're seeing out there already, where the tree roots are starting to cause the sidewalks to heave up and buckle. So again, I would tend to agree. It's very counterintuitive in many ways to remove trees like that, but there are some potential benefits that we think that would come from doing so. And in the climate, regard to the climate, absolutely a mature tree is going to provide more um, climate mitigation, obviously, than an immature tree. Um, we are blessed in a climate where trees do grow relatively quickly. We saw one of those photos earlier that we had trees in for about 10 years, and they've already grown up to the extent where they're providing a pretty good shade canopy and have grown up quite well there. So clearly, it's going to be a different environment for a short period of time. And then I think on the other side of the climate equation is the fact that if we're able to, again, facilitate and encourage people, maybe from making trips within the neighborhood, shorter trips, without feeling compelled to get in a car to do that, that in itself, by just reducing the amount of vehicular trips, it also plays a factor in how we may mitigate our climate change impacts. And so over time, as I said, our standards have been evolving, and we really are putting more emphasis on trying to help facilitate people being able to make trips without needing to get into a car to do that. So there are definite trade-offs. There's a scale here, and we're looking for something that we hope will help find a reasonable balance.
Okay, we have another question from Derek. Can you finish the discussion on completing a sidewalk on Saltzman on the park property to connect with the neighborhood? There is currently no sidewalk or access to Findlay from Saltzman.
Derek, would you mind maybe if you were able to, maybe we could, I'd like to ask a follow-up question. I'm not quite sure I understood. Ah,
Hi, Stephen. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah, thank you.
All right, perfect. Yeah, if you look at the park on the east side of the park at Saltzman, the neighborhood has a sidewalk that currently ends at Saltzman, and there's no way to get from the neighborhood up on Saltzman to the park. And so, we're talking about a really wide sidewalk that, of course, the community is totally against, but we really need a sidewalk on the east side of that park property to enable another path from the neighborhood into Finley. So yeah, right there.
Right there. Okay, yeah. So that is the portion of the path that we're proposing to extend both along the Thompson Road frontage as well as along the Saltzman Road frontage to try to help fill in some of those gaps. We know we have a few pedestrian gaps down Saltzman Road here on this side of the roadway. Yeah, so this is a real opportunity to complete one of those gaps in conjunction with this project.
But if 10-foot sidewalks are so important, why does it look like there's a 6-foot sidewalk there?
I think this rendering, Joe or Rocky, maybe you can help clarify. I think this might actually be a little bit older version that may not reflect that we've made a decision to go ahead and assuming that we're implementing the wider multi-use path, we would go ahead and continue that around the park frontage.
That is correct, Stephen. We had looked at working with the park district of matching the sidewalk that we put up along the north side, along with the east side of their property. That would be a 10-foot multi-use path along Saltzman. That takes us all the way down. Is that Hartford? No, not quite. We don't go down quite that far. I was just trying to think of what our street was right there.
Yeah, I think Derek mentioned it, Creekview or Creekside, maybe.
Yeah, it's Creekview.
Creekview.
Okay, there it is. Yep. Yeah, we would be providing a 10-foot multi-use path till we get to that intersection.
Mm-hmm. Good eyes, Derek. I hadn't even noticed the difference in the width there.
Okay, good. Can you just talk through a few other options into Findlay Elementary School in terms of access? And the concern is with Feston Ranch. Looks like you may have added a barrier. Can you talk through some of the other access into Findlay Elementary and what the vision is and getting it, since it's closed off now from Saltzman?
Mm-hmm. And are you thinking mostly about car access, Derek?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll start, and I'll let the project experts jump in if I get too far afield here. But So my understanding is that because of the proximity of the the Saltzman Road intersection, that it's really, and there's also a wetland area, I believe, right up in this area. So between these two fixed objects, if you will, there's a fairly narrow opportunity to try to place a driveway here. Our concern is that putting a driveway here is really just too close to the Saltzman intersection to be safe. So what we're actually going to be proposing is we'll have signage, as I understand it, that will direct people that are looking to access the Findlay Elementary School, rather, to continue west on Thompson Road down to the Old Thompson Road connection, and then use Old Thompson Road here to get up to the school site and then back out. And you're right, there's a proposal to restrict vehicular access here. We would retain bike and pedestrian access through this roadway, but close off the vehicular access again to just minimize opportunities for people that may be coming from and going to the school from driving through the subdivision.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I currently don't see any hands raised and no open questions in the Q&A. It is 7:26 p.m. So maybe if you wanted to put up that final slide again.
There we are. And I would say too, if you go to that web link there, the Thompson Road project page, there's going to be an email address. I believe it's LUTPROJ, short for project, LUTPROJ @co.washington.or.us. And that will, I just realized we're missing a .us in our web address down here. So it should be co.washington.or.us/Thompson. But anyway, there's an opportunity there to provide an email comment to our project team, and then we'll follow up on those comments as well. And we very much appreciate everyone's time tonight and attention for joining us. And we will look forward to our open house, it sounds like, in the November timeframe.
I'd just like to say thank you to staff and to our participants. I looked at the questions. There were 45 questions answered and a considerable amount of dialogue. So thank you for that. And Marcus, thank you for facilitating as well.
And I'd like to add to that, thank you, team, for bringing all this information forward. It was really helpful to hear about the arborist information and to see the slides in terms of what those recommendations might mean. So thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who's joined us tonight.
Please be safe. And I think our continuing message is wear your mask, get vaccinated, and help all of us protect each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.